Good evening, everybody. We're live on the radio tonight. How's that? I feel like the NFL guy telling me, go, 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 go. Thank you for joining us tonight. My name's Pat O'Shaughnessy. I'm a supporter of moving Danville forward, and I'd like to welcome you all tonight to our first of what we will be many public forums, informational meetings that we hope to have between now and November. We'll at least have these monthly to help us all continue to understand what a change in government can do for the city of Danville, what a city manager form of government can do for the city of Danville as we move into the future. I like to start each meeting I speak with the reading of the exact question we hope will be on your November 6, 2018 ballot. It clearly states what we are working towards and clearly dispels any of the other rhetoric you may have heard. The question is, on the petition and on the petition to be filed and on your November ballot, is shall the city of Danville, Illinois adopt the managerial form of municipal government and continue to elect aldermen from wards? One simple question, no mention of reducing the number of aldermen nor the wards from which they are elected. For anyone to say otherwise simply is not true. Tonight's format will include 3 speakers, followed by a question and answer session. Questions can be asked only by writing them down and handing them to one of the volunteers. You can either take them to the back, raise your hand, they'll come pick them up. We're going to do the questions after all 3 of the speakers are done. We'll direct them to the one that you, ask for, or they'll figure out which one it is. We're going to try to get to all the questions and all the answers tonight. We want to respect the time of our speakers who came from out of town, so we do intend to keep this to 90 minutes today. We ask that you would put your name, your address, and your email address on your question, so if we don't get it answered tonight, we'll be sure to get it answered. All the questions, all the emails will also be posted on our website, which should go live tomorrow afternoon or the next day. We are excited tonight that this is being recorded live by WITY, to be replayed and available both in audio and video. So watch for that tomorrow on their website, wityradio.com. And we'd like to start tonight with a brief history of governance in the city of Danville. Since it was founded, I think it helps for all of us to know where we're going if we look back on where we have been. And presenting that information tonight is Mr. Jim Mulvaney. Jim's a local attorney and vice president and market manager of First Financial Bank in Danville. Jim?
Thank you, Pat, and thank all of you for coming tonight. The brief history of the city's government is, there we go. The city of Danville was founded 1 year after the county in 1827. The county seat was here in Danville, and the early government of Danville was pretty much tied to the county. Wasn't very formal, as you can imagine. There were very few people here. The people here were early settlers, and it was an agrarian economy. Following the Civil War in the 1860s, it looks like Danville adopted its first mayoral aldermanic form of government. And that first mayor was elected in 1867 following the war. Danville, from 1867 to about 1926, 1927, had the mayor-alderman form of government. 1926 saw a change. I believe the political scientists here, more than I, can tell you why the commission form of government came into being. However, Danville adopted the commission form of government in 1926 and 1927 area. That was an election process where a mayor and in Danville 4 commissioners were all elected at large. Danville had a mayor, it had a commissioner of finance, a commissioner of public works, a commissioner of public property, and a commissioner of public safety. All of those 5 individuals were elected at large, and they were both legislators and they were executives. They ran their departments. So someone ran the finance department, someone ran the public works department, someone ran the public property department, and someone the public safety department. And the mayor was in charge generally over all the departments. So it was really a dual function. They were both legislators, they were the council, they made the policy, and they also carried the policy out. Probably was a very efficient form of government. for a small community. In the history of this mayoral commission form of government, from 26 to 87, there was never a person in a minority classification, whether that person was African American, Asian, or Hispanic, to be elected government. Figure out how this goes. In the 1980s, there was a series of cases generated by the Voting Rights Act of 1965. When you have a city that has had a government from 1926 to the mid-1980s that has never elected in an at-large election a person who is in a minority, whether they're African American, Hispanic, or Asian, something is wrong with the system. And there was something wrong with our system here in Danville. Ours was not the first case. In 1985, in the city of Springfield, McNeil versus City of Springfield was filed. And it was the first case that was decided. That case was 2 years in the making. It went to a full trial, and it was very contentious, also very expensive. After the 2 years of trial, the judge on January 12th, 1987, Judge Harold Baker, issued his ruling. And he found that, in fact, in Springfield, Illinois, the commission form of government violated the 1965 Voting Rights Act. 2 days later, in Danville, Illinois, the plaintiffs in our Voting Rights Act filed a petition in the federal court to change the form of government with the allegation, same as Springfield, that the voting in an at-large form diluted minority rights. Because that trial in Springfield went 2 years, the demographics in Springfield were very similar to Danville, and because of the cost that Springfield incurred, which was $500,000 according to the reports, Danville commissioners, and there were 4 at that time because our mayor, Hardin Hawes, had retired, and the finance commissioner, Wilbur Charlo, assumed both the finance position and the mayoral position. So we had 4 commissioners instead of 5 during this voting rights case. Almost immediately, within days of the filing of the case, the city determined that it was not in the city's best interests to litigate and continue to try to fight the matter. They knew that it would be expensive, they knew it would be divisive, and they knew that the outcome, because the judge was the same and it was a bench trial, the demographics were similar, would be likely that the commission form in Danville would be overturned by the court. So instead, they adopted a strategy of negotiations with the plaintiffs. And those negotiations took place over a series of meetings, and there were a series of settlements that were initiated by the plaintiffs and accepted by the defendants. The final one, and I'm not going to get into each one, but the final one resulted in the commission form of government being terminated and the city council mayor be established. The mayor was a at-large position. The city aldermen were 2 per ward, and the wards are based upon statute, and the size community we have meant there were 7 wards, so there were 14 aldermen to be elected from wards. The city commissioners would retain their position for 3 years, and the elections, during this time, there was an injunction on a lot of activity that was going on between the city and the plaintiffs. But the injunction to bar the referendum was lifted, the referendum was removed, and everything went forward. And in April of that year, the first council under the 14 aldermen and 1 mayor was adopted. So that is how we got to where we are today. In the meantime, backing up about a year in 1985-86, there were a group of people, and they were attempting to have a referendum for a city manager position. The difference was that they proposed to have 1 alderman per ward. So that would have meant 7 aldermen, not 14. That was derailed. I was the attorney for it. I made a mistake. I put the petition on 2 sides of a sheet of paper. The judge ruled I was wrong. So, everyone makes mistakes. I made a big one. We couldn't have an election because I had the petition on front and back side. The judge ruled that it had to be on a single side of the paper. Technicality, but technicalities are important. So I admit to that mistake. I own it. But in a sense, it didn't make a whole lot of difference in the initial stage because the key was to get representation from wards that would not dilute votes. In the interim, I said there was another referendum that was proposed. This was by the city. And the city, instead of having this litigation, they wanted to stop the litigation, have a referendum. The plaintiffs would have nothing of that, and rightly so. So the referendum was put on hold by the injunction, and part of the settlement got rid of that referendum, got rid of that injunction, and we moved forward. In the situation we have today, the change in government is to keep the alderman and to respect and to agree with the position of the voting rights case in 1987. We elected to retain 2 aldermen per ward. So there'll be no dilution in the number of aldermen. There'll be no dilution in the representation in any ward based upon any minority classification. Again, the ones we have largely in our community are African American is by far the greatest, followed by Hispanic and a smaller Asian Pacific community. But we have all 3 in the community, and we have successfully elected minority aldermen ever since 1987. So that's the brief history of where we were and how we got here. I said that the changes of government were by court settlement. So the citizens of Danville, the last time they had a chance to have their input into an election was 1926. So the last time that the citizens had a chance to vote for Danville's form of government in a vote was 1926. The voting rights case in 1987 was necessary, but it was not a choice of the people. The people did not vote for it. It was a stipulated agreement between the 2 parties. And it was a good agreement, it was a just agreement, and it was an agreement that we want to stay with today, to keep the aldermen the same number, and as the next speakers will, I think, expound upon, the powers that are given the aldermen in the managerial form of government are far greater than they have in the mayoral form of government. So the aldermen have expanded powers under this proposed form of government than they would have under a mayoral council form of government. And Dr. Hantz and Mr. Carter will get into that more in detail, but I just wanted to have first 5 minutes to let you know a brief history of the government, where we came from the early founding through the Civil War times to the mid-1920s, the mid-1980s, and now in 2018. So thank you. I hope that explained something in the way we got here today. So with that, I'll turn it back to Pat.
Thank you, Jim. Dr. Charles Hantz, Professor of Political Science at Danville Area Community College, has been instructing students at DAC since 2000 and teaches a wide variety of classes, including state and local government. Dr. Hantz is a graduate of University of Connecticut, so he knows a little bit about women's basketball, and he earned his PhD in political science in 1998. He's published in academic journals, co-authored an American government textbook, and is involved in advising students on DAC's campus. Before we began this journey, we asked Dr. Hantz to write a paper, to research a paper on the pros and cons of city management. His paper, which we have copies here tonight for you if you're interested in the back, was actually our launching point for this campaign. And Dr. Hantz has graciously agreed to come here tonight and give us a brief outline of his findings. Dr. Hantz?
Excuse me. I hate to interrupt like this, sir, but I just have one question. I need it right now. Why didn't you or you check with any plaintiffs from the 87 case on what we felt about this? It seems to me there have been fair to have heard from you guys, but to all of a sudden find that there's a group that want to they can vote away a person's civil rights, I have a problem with that.
And we'll answer questions at a later time, okay?
Well, I'm sorry, but I just wanted to let you know. Bringing a professor here to tell us about a way it's supposed to work is not going to be helpful as far as I'm concerned.
And it's not the actuality of how city managers work. They work with.
We'll get to questions,
money
okay?
people.
If you would just,
They work with money people, and they work with.
we had speakers here tonight, and we asked for people to do questions, and we'd like to respect their time. Thank
We
you.
want to make sure you know that there are a couple of things here.
I don't see anybody of color sitting up there. That really bothers me.
No, not here we go.
No, that's Republicans, because you people all think that you're supposed to just run anything you want. How else do we have somebody like Trump in office?
We'll be arrested now.
Well, it sounds like, I know, it sounds like one of my American government classes.
Tell us the way it's written in paper, but also talk about how it really functions in the cities around the country.
I plan on doing that, yes, to the best of my ability. And so I can't think of, it is a pleasure being here this evening, and I can't think of a more important question in the public square than how do we want to be governed? And it's a question that has bedeviled political philosophers for thousands of years, and your presence here this evening is in that great tradition of trying to answer that question, how do we want to be governed? So my participation in the process, as Pat indicated, was to write a paper, do some research on the council manager form of government as it compares to the mayor. I took it as a purely academic exercise. I don't have a dog in this race, as they say. I live outside the city limits. So it's how you decide is entirely up to you. My role is to provide some information from what I found from experts who studied the two different forms and provide that information, and then you'll cast your ballot and make the decision collectively as it should be.
How much people of color participation was before 87?
That I don't know. So,
Good.
so I'd be more than happy to do additional research, and I would love to do that. So, you know, if you can pose.
You have to understand why we are so intense about this.
I would agree with you.
We weren't asked
Yeah.
at any point while the city government was operating
Right.
before 87. And now you're coming and you're going to talk academically about how it's supposed to run.
Right.
And not take into account that most cities were the city manager.
Right.
Very little minority input.
Right. And so if there are questions that remain unanswered at the end of my presentation, I would be more than happy to address those in any form that you would like. I enjoy doing this, and I think your questions and concerns should be addressed, and I'd be more than happy to assist in that regard. All right, there we go. So instead of reading the 4-page paper that I've got back there, but it's free, so you can feel free to take one. I'm going to give you the highlights of this. So what do city managers do better than mayors? And the first, there we go, is provide higher levels of services. So you may wonder, when it comes to police, fire, building code enforcement, transportation, solid waste management services, the city manager provides a higher level of service. That is to say, you may wonder, well, what's a higher level of service? Well, you have basic, mid, and higher. And a basic service in terms of transportation might be picking somebody up on a city bus, taking at point A, and then dropping them off at point B. That's a basic city service in terms of transportation. Last year, the city unveiled a wonderful, I think, transportation center terminal And so instead of people waiting out in the rain or in the elements, they now have some place to stay and a central place, and that's a higher level of service. And so city managers do better at that. And you say, well, wait a second, didn't that terminal cost some money? Yes, higher levels of services do cost additional revenue. And we'll get into that, and how is it that city managers are able to pay for that? We'll get into that in just a little bit. So the second point is with city managers, there is less political conflict. And thinking of the role of the city manager and the council, when you think about that, it makes a lot of sense. The council hires the city manager. And so the city manager is responsible on in most instances that I've seen, it's a yearly contract. It may be a little bit different in Mr. Carter's experience, but what I see is yearly contracts. So a city manager gets a yearly contract, and it wouldn't be to his advantage or her advantage in any way to be conflictual with the people that hired that individual. That city manager is a city employee. They're paid by the city to help manage and run the city. And so there's less conflict, and as a result, there is more opportunity to solve real problems for the community. And that has a spillover effect because when problems are solved, communities tend to prosper. Fewer problems tend to create better communities, physically healthier communities. And so with physically healthier communities comes lower borrowing costs. In most instances, when you have a capital expenditure, it's probably a bond of some sort that's been floated and a promise to pay it off. So you have these municipal bonds that the city issues and an expiration date of when that has to be paid off. A lot of times that bond is used for, as I say, capital infrastructure investments. Those bonds are going to be rated by bonding agencies, and the lower the interest rate, the better, as a result of the better fiscal picture, leads to lower borrowing costs. As a result of that, that saved revenue or that saved money from that lower interest rate can be used in other places to solve other problems. Council managers, getting ahead of myself here. Council managers also spend less money on wasteful political projects, quote unquote political projects, than city managers do. City managers spend less on political projects than do mayors, and more is spent on water, sewers, and road infrastructure. These are the basis upon which this infrastructure is the basis upon which communities grow. Without it, communities stagnate, and there are a number of examples that I know of in which communities need to expand their water, their sewer, their drainage systems. City managers do a better job of anticipating those problems 5, 10, 15 years down the road than do mayors, who are more focused in the here and now because of the political structure of their office. City managers, again, are more or less apolitical. Yes, they are. It's a position, and they have to be political in some regard, but they are not a politician. And that gets expressed in the amount of time that they spend on the job. They spend 83% of their time is based of what city managers do is based on policy and city issues. That's compared to under 70%, it's about 69% for mayors. So mayors spend twice as much time on the political as do city managers. So for those who are shaking their heads saying, no, city managers are not political, you're absolutely right. They are part political. They just don't spend, they only spend about half the time that mayors do on that job. So more money spent on water, sewers, and road infrastructure leads to community being able to grow and to expand, and with that comes a stronger property tax base. And we all know the advantage of a stronger property tax base means more revenue for government and more services to the citizens of that community. And lastly, city managers display higher rates of innovation, such as e-government, reinventing government initiatives, and strategic planning. The one item that city manager-run cities don't do as well on, and it consumes a substantial part of the paper that I wrote, is, wait for it, there it is, is with voting. Voting turnout tends to decrease under city manager forms of government as compared to mayors. And the reason for that is there's no single mayoral candidate that to attract and generate excitement and to bring people out into the voting booths. So without that single person to generate that excitement, the excitement tends to ebb, and as a result, voter turnout tends to ebb. That is more than compensated, however, by the increased number of opportunities for citizens to contact their local government, their city government. So citizen participation outside of voting is much higher than in mayoral forms of government because of the innovation that city governments have. It's easier to click your way to government, through government, to find who you need to talk to, and press your issues in that way, rather than making your way down to City Hall and hoping to find somebody there. So good government results in a higher quality of life, with citizens more satisfied with their lives, their communities, and optimistic about their futures. The question is city manager the only way of getting to good government? Because with good government, all that stuff that was on the first slide, that's a result of good government. And the question is, do city managers, are they the only way to get to good government? The answer to that is no, obviously. Probably in your lifetimes, you're able to identify mayors that have done an outstanding job in providing the services and the quality of life that I think is every citizen's birthright. What the literature does say is that good government is more likely, it's not a guarantee, but it is more likely with city managers. And there is a whole host of reasons that will probably get expressed when we get to the question and answer session as to why that is. But that is, to summarize the literature, it's right there. Good government is more likely with city managers than without. So thank you very much.
You forgot to talk about the salary differential. Why didn't you mention the salary being the city manager?
Oh, that's a great question. And
Why did you do that?
yeah, I saw that in the paper, and
Very crucial.
yeah, you're absolutely right. And I'm
This is
glad to
all
address
about
that.
saving money, isn't it?
No,
It's not about saving money.
And I'm sure our next speaker will be able to answer a lot of your questions, if you just give him a chance, okay? Steve Carter is our next speaker. Steve is probably, or was, the longest-serving city manager in the state of Illinois. There's been a lot of speculation that some of our committee wants to be city manager, wants to be mayor. I'll dispel that right now. We don't. We can't. We're not qualified. That's our biggest fear, is that there's no one in the electorate that we can go out and find that is qualified to tackle the problems that are facing our city and into the future. Steve retired from 5 years ago as the city manager of Champaign, where he served for 28 years. Prior to that time, he'd been a city administrator in Moline, Illinois for 6 years, assistant city manager in Sioux City, Iowa for 5 years, project director for the International City Management Association for 2 years, and an intern and management assistant in Phoenix, Arizona for 3 years. Steve is currently serving as a volunteer senior advisor for the Illinois City and County Management Association. He chaired the Chancellor's Advisory Task Force on the Willard Airport developing a strategic plan, and currently serves as chair of the Airport Advisory Committee. He continues assisting with the efforts to protect the Muhammad Aquifer, and he recently completed assisting Unit 4 as the facilitator of a community committee examining their facility needs and recommending a long-term facilities plan. Steve graduated from Indiana State University and holds his master's degree in political science, municipal administration from the University of Iowa. He's a life member of the International City and County Management Association, a member and past president of the Illinois City and County Management Association, and a fellow of the National Academy of Public Administration. He's a U.S. Army veteran serving during the Vietnam War. It's our pleasure to welcome Mr. Steve Carter.
Thanks, Pat. It's nice to be here today. And just an old guy. I'm retired. Really lucky to have a career in local government for over 40 years. I was able to serve communities from Phoenix back to Champaign. Really a dream career for me, and I just couldn't be happier with what I was able to enjoy over all those years. Nothing makes me happier than to see people who are interested in talking about local government. My biggest frustration over all those years is, people who don't care, people who are, they have a lot of other things on the mind and they're not active in their community and they don't care what's going on. A lot of room for disagreement. I never saw an issue where there was just one way to do things. There's always a lot of different ways to do things. And that discussion and involvement and inclusion of the community and their local government was just terrific. I really enjoyed that. Had the pleasure of meeting a lot of wonderful people from Danville over the years. Not so much through city government, but through Boy Scouts, because we're all part of the same Boy Scout Council, and through Rotary. The Danville Rotary Club established the Champaign Rotary Club in 1917, so we just had our 100th anniversary a couple years ago. Wonderful people in both those organizations. And maybe the best hire I ever made as city manager, and I'd like to say that all the people I hired were just terrific, but that didn't always work out that way. But maybe the best, certainly one of the best, was Joan Walls, who's a Danville native and moved to Champaign a few years ago with her husband. And Joan started in the police department and got moved over. We hired her in our community relations office because community relations is part of the manager's office in Champaign, and then had an opportunity to promote her to deputy city manager over there. So she's like a number 2 person in the city government in Champaign right now. Just doing a terrific job. A good friend and just a wonderful person. So let me run through a little bit about, expand a little bit about council manager government, and then what it looks like in Illinois. And again, I'm going to talk a little bit about maybe some conceptual or theoretical stuff, but basically, I've been a practitioner for over 40 years, and so whatever that ends up being is what I am today. So in terms of, if you look at the whole country, there are basically 5 different types of organizations that communities can have for their local government: council manager, the mayor council, which is what you have now, commission form, which Jim talked about earlier. In Illinois, there are a lot of commission forms, a lot of cities with commission form, mostly the really small towns, because when the commissioners get elected, one person's the mayor, one person may be administration, one person may be public safety. I mean, they don't have many staff people, and so the council members actually have to do some of the work as well. Town meeting and representative town meetings kind of specialize in the New England area. Not available here in Illinois. Council manager government was invented in the 1900s. They say 1907 maybe was the first year council manager government. Born out of the progressive movement. If you remember your history back in those days, there were really a lot of changes happening in the country. But in terms of city administration, cities were getting much larger, and so they were taking in a lot of tax money. And there's quite a bit of corruption involved, particularly in larger cities, really from east to west, north to south. And so people were really tired of paying large taxes and seeing their money wasted. And so, well, how do we make sure our government if we're paying all these taxes, how do we make sure that our money is going for a good purpose? Well, their thought was, well, let's run it like a business corporation. At the same time, it was really the rise of the American corporation. And so the council manager government was kind of based on that whole model, where you have shareholders, or in this case, the citizens. They elect the city council, which is the same as the board of directors. Under the model form, kind of the original form of council manager government, the mayor was elected at large, like all the council members, and council members selected the mayor. The mayor was not directly elected, but like the chairman of the board, you go into a business corporation, okay, the board of directors, okay, who's going to be the chair of the board? And then they hire a CEO to run the business, and the city council hires the city manager, and he's responsible for hiring all the staff. So, if you look across the country, all kinds of communities have council manager government. When I was just starting back in the old days, in the late 60s, there was a thought that, well, city manager form, council manager form of government works great in small and middle-sized cities, but you'll never see a large city with council manager government. Well, now you have Phoenix, you have San Antonio, you have Dallas, you have San Diego. So, and those are some of the best managed cities in the world right now. So we've seen as time has gone by that city manager form of government works very well in large cities as well as the smaller communities. So here's a breakdown in terms of cities above the population of 2,500 and across the whole country. And you can see council manager government has about 48% of all the cities above 2,500 have that form. So it's the predominant form of local government right now. Mayor council has about 44%. Commission, as I said, has a very small percentage, mainly real small towns, town meetings, and representative town meetings, primarily in the New England area. So some of the benefits that, like Chuck was talking about, flexibility, clearly defined roles and responsibility, which I think is really crucial in any organized effort. People have to know exactly, well, who's responsible for doing what. Their council manager governments tend to do a very good job of having a manager working with the council to develop their goals, their strategic plans, so they have a real clear roadmap in terms of where they want to be. So it's hard to compare one local government with another. Just every community is different. Every local government is slightly different, and there's really not a good single study that really does a thorough analysis of that. But some of the folks that have looked at this over time, one of them, there's an initiative called Equip to Innovate, found that top performing cities in all but one area use council manager form. 2/3 of Moody's AAA cities are council manager cities. So council manager cities tend to have really strong financial systems, policies. We figured out how to balance the budget. The revenue has to equal the expenditures, something the state hasn't figured out recently, but local government has. And Champaign, for example, has a AAA bond rating, just as indicated here. IBM, one of the things that corporation does, they have a close eye on government at all levels because they do a lot of business with local governments. And they've done a study and found that council manager cities are 10% more efficient than other forms. Other ways of measuring, the National Civic League has endorsed the council manager model form of government since 1915. And they also do the All-American City Award, and 75% of the communities recognized in the last few years have all been council manager cities. So they've tended to be successful where they exist. Now, under the model form of council manager government, as I said before, the mayor gets elected. Usually there are 5 people elected to the city council, then they select the mayor. And many communities, they just rotate that around because he's just chair of the board. They're the public face of the community. They provide, policy guidance for the board. But a lot of that has changed. Over the last 20 years, there have been many more council manager cities that have gone to the direct election of the mayor, and more cities have also gone to electing their city council members by district or by ward. Those are trends that have been occurring probably since I've been in the profession, so at least the last 30 years for sure. So what's being proposed here, and I'm not going to tell people how to vote. All I can do is just share what my experience is and what I understand. If you go look at the Illinois statute, what they show for council manager government is kind of the model where council members are elected at large and the mayor is selected from the council. But there are options under the statute, and one of the options is you can retain the aldermanic system. Rock Island has done that. Bloomington has done that. So you have the same number of aldermen. The mayor has basically the same powers as he had before, other than he does have the administrative authority of running the day-to-day operation of the city. And the manager is hired and fired by the city council. The council, they have the ultimate responsibility because they make all the policies, they pass the budget, they set up all the personnel rules, they approve all the collective bargaining agreements, and so the ultimate power is in the city council with the aldermen. And I don't know how many times over the years in Phoenix that in meeting with the mayor, I would say, Mayor, that is a great idea, but I can't do anything, the staff's not going to do anything to implement that unless you have a majority of the city council approve that, because the city manager works for the council, doesn't work for the mayor, works for the city council, gets all of his marching instructions from the city council. The mayor may have the greatest idea in the world, but if he can't get a majority support in the city council, it ain't going to get done by the staff. The manager's role, manager is an at-will employee. All it takes is a majority of the council to fire him, and that's supposed to keep the manager in sympathy with what the council is trying to do. I found that to be a pretty good incentive. If your job's dependent on it, why that's who you're going to listen to. Manager prepares the budget, obviously, for consideration, recruits, hires supervisors, is really an advisor generally to the governing body, carries out policies established by the city council. City manager doesn't set policy, the council sets policy. So go to Champaign, you have probably 15 pages of financial policies that the council has discussed and approved that governs the whole financial operation of the city. So it's not the mayor that did it, not the city manager and the finance director worked to put them together, and then after the council discussed them and adopted it, then that's what the manager followed. So in terms of cost, which is a factor, and I'd have to say that there aren't a lot of studies that are able to compare one city to another, so it's hard to do that. But I'd have to say that of all the mayors that I've worked for over the years, none of them ran for mayor because they like to work on a budget. That's not why mayors tend to run for office. They're interested in public safety, they're interested in economic development, they're interested in neighborhood preservation. I mean, there are a lot of things that mayors that I've worked with over the years have been interested in. They did not want to spend hours and hours working on the detail of a budget or going through all the personnel issues that every organization faces. That's just not why mayors get elected. So managers, tend to run a very efficient operation, and so costs are reduced where you have manager. Managers tend to be very good at economic development, which is very key, to the future of any community. Danville, appreciates that as well as folks in Champaign do. Champaign right now, is the 10th largest city in the state of Illinois. When I started working there, the population was about 65,000. Now it's 85,000. So managers and a professional approach to economic development leads to more economic development. if I push the right button here. So we talked about how to adopt it. It can be adopted different ways, but in Illinois, referendum is the typical approach to doing that. And so let's talk about Illinois specifically. So the state of Illinois has the honor of having more units of government than any other state in the United States. And cities, villages, and towns, part of that, we have 1,298 of those in the state of Illinois, but only 212 of them have a population greater than 10,000. So you can tell, there are just a lot of small towns in Illinois. 89 of them have a greater population than 25,000. Now, if you break those down, of those cities over 100,000, 4 of the 7 have council manager government. Obviously not Chicago. 50 to 100,000 population, 17 of the 21 cities in that population range have council manager government. 25 to 50,000, 30 of 61 have council manager government. An additional 18 have professional administrators. So you can see cities in Illinois above the population of 25,000 are heavily invested in hiring professional people to help run the day-to-day operation of their city. The I-74 professional collection, those of us in central Illinois, like along the I-74 corridor, we have a lot of things in common. We don't have a lot of things in common with Lake Forest, Illinois, or some of the Chicago suburbs, but we have a lot of things in common downstate. Rock Island has council manager government. Galesburg has council manager government. Peoria has council manager government. Bloomington has council manager government. Normal has council manager government. Champaign has council manager government. Urbana is just in the process of hiring an administrator. Their administrator starts on June 4th. I talked to the mayor. She said, I didn't have a chance to work on any of the things that I wanted to work on when I ran for mayor because I have a steady stream of people coming in with these questions about the day-to-day operation of the city. I don't have any time to work on the redevelopment of Lincoln Square because I'm spending all my time working on all these small issues, and that's why she reestablished the position of administrator in Urbana. Then Danville, you guys will decide later this year. Just based upon my experience as a manager, there's really an emphasis on working together as a team. You have the mayor council team, you have the kind of the top departmental staff people, your executive management team, and you all have to work together. If you're going to accomplish something, you can't have any weakness in that. It's like a chain, and the weakest link really impacts your performance. So if you're going to be a high-performing organization, you have to have a strong team made up of your elected officials as well as your staff. Having clear lines of responsibility and accountability. So if you adopt city manager government, you want to know what the city manager is supposed to do. It's all spelled out by statute. So, when I was a city manager, if the city council member came in and said, I want you to hire my friend over here because he needs a job, I'd say, well, tell him to submit an application to the city, and we hire, based on qualifications. We look at the full range of skills that the person has, knowledge, skills, and ability, and that's the basis that we hire people. And if that's the best candidate, why, we'll hire him, and we hope he'll be a great employee for the city. And if the city council member said, well, I want to hire him anyway, well, I'm sorry, you can't do that. By statute, the city manager has the authority for hiring employees, and it would be illegal for a city council member to hire somebody to work for the city because he doesn't have any authority to do that. I think one of the things that I've noticed over the years is, really the importance of the city council. And I've had people, who have come to work as city council members who'd been on county board in different positions. And I think if you talk to any of the council members in Champaign and ask them if they're engaged, if they're spending time that's really valuable and adding to the value of the city, why, they'd all raise their hand and say, amen, I am. because they're the people that make the decisions. And so every policy, every project, everything ends up going to the city council for approval. If the mayor votes against it, the mayor votes against it. If the majority of the council wants to do it, that's what the city does. And so it's a system, and it goes back to, it's really kind of a consensus kind of approach, I think, because you have to be able to build a consensus on the city council to do anything, to get anything done in the city. And if you're not able to do that, then you're not going to be successful in whatever endeavor you're taking. So it really is a much more substantive role for the city council than a mayor council system. And just based on my years of experience, I've seen cases where the city council may want to do something in the mayor council system, and the mayor doesn't want to do it. And so the city council may try to convince the mayor, and the mayor says, I don't want to do it. And so what alternative does a council member have? Well, the mayor would typically say, well, I'll see you at the next election. If you don't like the way that I'm approaching this, well, then you can run for mayor, and then you can make these decisions next time. Now, if the city council wants to do something and the city manager says, I don't think that's a good idea, now the city manager has the choice of, if it's a matter of ethics, you can resign. Rather than do something illegal or unethical, your responsibility in our profession then is to walk away. And if you don't do that, and if you don't do what the council wants, you're fired. And they'll hire someone that'll come in there and do what the city council wants. And, the day-to-day operation is in the hands of a person who's been trained, to operate a large organization. Typically, City of Champaign, our budget was like $125 million. We had 500 employees. There are all kinds of laws and regulations and requirements the city is required to do. So it's a big job just running the day-to-day operation of the city. And those are things that many times the elected officials, they're not that interested in, they're certainly not trained to do, and that's why you really want a professional staff person to do that. The mayor ends up being the spokesman for the city, provides leadership, builds consensus, provides leadership in intergovernmental relations, does the lobbying. So, a mayor may look at it and say, well, my role is really reduced. And I think what a better way to describe that is, well, his role is focused. Instead of, being interrupted 10 times a day by, somebody that has an operations question, he can focus on those major issues that are facing the city. When Dan McCollum was the mayor, and some of you may know Dan because he's over around this area because he owns a farmland not too far from here. But, Dan focused on, he had 4 or 5 major issues he wanted to work on all the time. He could care less about, the day-to-day operation of the city. He wanted somebody else to do that. He wanted to be able to work on drainage in Campus Town. He wanted to work on, whatever those things happened to be, and that's where he spent his time. And if you take a look at what he accomplished during those 12 years, it was pretty remarkable. Some really major things happened because he was able to focus his time on that. For council members, one of the most important things is developing a strategic plan or what the goals are for the city. This seems pretty simple in some respects. If you want me to do a job, well, tell me what you want me to do. And so, as a council, well, what are the goals for the city? What do you really want to accomplish in the next 2 years, in the next 5 years? What are the things that are most important? And, the council, with some input from, professional staff and the mayor, they think about that, they deliberate, they get public input into that decision, then they lay out, okay, here are the 10 things or the 20 things that we want to accomplish during our term. Those become the marching orders for the staff. If you don't have that, then whatever happens at the next council meeting becomes the priority, and as a consequence, you don't get much done at all. So, the whole idea of setting a strategic plan and identifying goals for the whole organization to work together is really important. The city manager, most important thing, well, carry out the goals of the council. You provide information and support You manage the daily operation, and including excellent customer service, which is really, the bedrock, the foundation of why we have local government. Manage the finances, manage the city's employee relations, the relations with all the city's bargaining units. And, as I looked at, how my career evolved and, how were we successful, it just seems like, here's how you can really be successful, regardless of whether you're a big community or a small community, what's the issue that you happen to be dealing with. Have clear goals, creating a unifying purpose and a direction so that everybody knows, okay, here's what we're really working on. These are the most important things for our community, and we're all going to work on it. And not just maybe the city, but, the economic development group, everybody ought to be working towards those goals. Defined roles for people working together. We're not all made the same. We don't all have the same strengths and weaknesses. On a baseball team, you have catchers and pitchers, and but they all have very defined roles. On basketball teams now, those roles are getting more and more complicated in terms of, well, what's a 3, what's a 4, what positions do you play? Can you play more than one position? But people have to know, well, what's my job, and exactly what do you expect of me? And once they know, they can get a lot done. E stands for competent execution to produce results. You have to have great people working for you. So hiring good employees, paying them a decent wage, giving them clear direction, really important. A is positive attitude. Sometimes it's easy to get down. Sometimes bad things happen. You got to deal with it. But if we're going to be successful, again, you have to have a positive attitude about your organization and the town or the city you're working in. And finally, and maybe most important, is trust. You have to be able to trust the people that you're working in to follow through with the things that they're responsible for doing, to do that with integrity, and to do that in what's the best interest of all the citizens of your community. And those are the things that I think, regardless of the form of government, are going to make Danville a bigger success than what you have been in the past. And with that, I think we're ready for some questions. Pat?
Thank you. Excuse me. Thank you, Steve and Chuck and Jim, and thanks for your listening tonight. We do have a few questions that have been handed in, and if there are any others that you have questions, if you want to raise your hand, they'll come and collect them, please, and we'll just read these, and whichever one of you want to respond, you can. Public administration, like any other profession, needs to be aware of the winds of change that occur in economic development, staffing and training of departments, pension payments, state mandates, and the needs of citizens, to name a few. Provide examples of changes over the last few decades and how important it is to identify a new process when these changes occur. Steve, do you want to? That's not mine. I don't have questions tonight.
It's a rather broad question.
Can you talk a little bit more?
Okay, so-
I just want to.
Can we-
you talk a little bit
we're
more
doing it by
actual
cards.
about how your city of Champaign works? You talked in very good terms in a general way, but we need to hear the nuts and bolts of how.
Kind of the day-to-day stuff.
Yeah, how you
Sure.
work, who you saw, that you're doing town meeting.
Yeah, let me answer that question first, if I could. And so, there are a lot of ways that change occurs. Sometimes legislatively, state legislature may pass a law that requires a change in operation. The biggest one in my last years as manager was the recession. So in 2008, in 2007, we're watching what the economy is doing nationally. We're watching what's happening to sales tax and the level of development in Champaign. Finance director and I are talking, and he says, this looks like this may be really going to be a serious recession for us, and we need to start planning for it today. And so even before all the economists said we're getting into recession, we put projects on hold. We put a hold on all hiring, and we started working on the budget for the next year. When we saw, what was happening with our revenue, we created a voluntary separation program. We looked at the state retirement system has like a voluntary retirement system. We thought we couldn't afford it. It was too expensive. It wasn't going to reduce our costs. We put together a voluntary separation program. We eliminated 40 positions the first year of the recession. We cut back capital projects to try to get within the amount of money that we thought we were going to have. We worked through each of the departments, gave them goals to try to, have them look at their own individual departments and, what's the best way to cut X amount of money from your department, come back with your recommendations in terms of what that would be. We looked at some overall ideas. We looked at what the private sector was doing as they were starting to adjust to the economy. Sometimes, the private sector may be like a year ahead of the public sector in some ways. So we were checking to see what the private sector was doing in terms of trying to adjust their spending and their income. We met several times with the city council to brief them on what we thought was happening and some ideas and to get their ideas in terms of, what was acceptable from a policymaker standpoint in terms of the kind of cuts we could be looking at. So every year during the recession, Champaign had a balanced budget. We made terrific cuts in our staffing and our budget at the time. But, we did what needed to be done at the time. Other cities decided, well, let's just not spend as much in what we're paying into pension systems. We'll defer some of these other costs that are going to come back and bite us later on. But, we think the recession may not be that bad. It may get over with quickly. And so we're just going to try to, push the can down the road a little bit. Well, after we got through that first year, we had a very different organization. But we were ready to move forward. Many of these other communities, they were fighting the recession for 2 or 3 or 4 or 5 years. And some of them are still trying to recover from that. And Champaign's been adding staff back because, they made the decisions. We saw what was happening. We made the decisions that had to be made in a timely manner, and then we were able to move on when the economy allowed it. So that's an example of where that was a big change for all of us and how we tried to respond to that. But it's a good example of kind of how we operated on a day-to-day basis too. Council members, Champaign has council meeting every week. Every other week's a study session where we talk about issues, bigger issues, and then the alternate weeks are the actual voting on ordinances and resolutions. And we have like a 3-month agenda, so council members see what are the issues coming up in the next 3 months, so they know what's coming and they know so they can be prepared for dealing with those issues when they get there. Major issues, we meet with council in small groups, consistent with the Freedom of Information Act and the Open Meetings Law, to brief them and get their ideas, before staff puts any final report together, so that we know what all the council members are thinking. Sometimes the editorial page in the News-Gazette criticized the city staff, the city manager, and the city council because there were hardly any votes against the city manager's recommendation. Well, I'm not stupid. I'm not going to recommend something that the city council is going to vote down. So any major issue, we'd had several discussions with council members beforehand. So we were able to craft a solution to whatever the issue was that we knew that would be acceptable to them. Well, duh. That just seems like that made good sense to me. But the News-Gazette thought that somehow the city council wasn't doing their job because the staff was.
I think Jim can answer this one. Is the referendum non-binding or binding? In either case, please say what that means in some detail.
Thank you. That's a good question. This is one of the few referendum in Illinois that are binding. Most initiatives in Illinois are non-binding, and that means that the voters will express an opinion or what they think should be or could be done. And then it's up to the governing body to consider that opinion that was voted upon and either adopt it, change it, they could even ignore it. This, however, is a binding referendum. That means if it passes, and it's a simple majority of those who vote on November 6th, then the city council in April will change over to a manager form of government. And that means that in the interim, the council has to adopt what are called enabling ordinances, which set forth the duties of the manager, the job description of the manager. Mr. Carter indicated that it's an at-will position, but there is a contract that's normally involved that the council will say that you will do these things and spell out the duties of the manager. So it would be binding, and then in April, the form of government would change to the council manager form of government. So it is a binding. If it loses, it stays the same. If it wins, it goes to the manager form of government. Did that answer the question?
Have you had a discussion with the current mayor about this situation?
Yes.
And?
He likes being mayor. He likes the authority of the mayor, and it's his wish that he wants to be mayor. That's obviously what I would think he would want. But he does, if he hasn't announced whether he'll run again for mayor, but he would like to be mayor. And he thinks he can do a good job. That's obviously he would. The question, if you didn't hear it, have I talked to the mayor about this referendum question? And the answer was yes, I have.
And for Dr. Hantz, can the lower voter turnout cause more government corruption at the alderman level? Can there be a low voter turnout causing some communities to be underrepresented and therefore disenfranchised?
Anytime that there's a situation where the voters who are the final check on elected officials aren't diligent in that capacity, then there does increase the chance of corruption. However, as Mr. Carter has pointed out, there is a strong level of ethics and that are to be followed by city manager, and then that if there is a lower level of citizen participation, then it would be the next best check would be the city manager, right? Because the city manager has a code of ethics that he or she lives by. They're professionals, and they wouldn't throw those professional ethics away for some short-term gain. The second question had to do with if voter participation decreases, would the representation on the city council change in terms of minority representation? And that would be unless there's a change in the district lines where the aldermen are voted from. Unless that changes, then it'd be virtually impossible for minority representation to be diluted on the city council. The lower number, if you had a majority white district for the council voting at 90%, there's only going to be, the two, under the current structure, the two people coming from that structure. You're still going to have, even if it's 10 or 15% in a minority community, the chances are you're still going to elect it from that minority community, somebody that's going to represent your interests. So it'd be virtually impossible to dilute under an aldermanic structure minority representation on the city council because you've created currently what's created is majority minority council areas, and that doesn't change when you move from a mayor form of government to a city manager form of government. Did that make sense at all? Yes.
That was my question. I don't live in this community. I'm a physician that happens to work in this community. The reason I asked that question is really some of the answers you gave, but I think it may not be clear to the populace that would be
Right.
exactly the case. And I think that would be one of the
Right.
biggest questions that would need to be answered is now representation going to be changed,
Right.
based on that? And I think
Right.
that fear has to be allayed.
Right, and right.
You know,
So-
it has to be understood.
So if for example, instead of two representatives from every district on the council, you had the same number, 14, but coming from the entire city, that kind of change does dilute minority representation. So that would be a marker that people would look for and say, well, are you changing the boundaries? Are you changing to at large or anything like that? That would change the way that we currently elect people into the council. So if that happens, then that's definitely a red flag for people to say, wait a second, this is going to dilute minority representation from what it currently exists today.
In my presentation, I stressed that the decision to have the question drafted the way it was to retain the election of aldermen from wards, 2 aldermen per each ward. Mr. Carter indicated that many of the cities in Illinois have at-large councils under the city manager form of government. Champaign has a hybrid. They have some at-large, some at wards. This group thought that it was very important and critical that aldermen continued to be elected from wards, not to dilute the minority representation and the minority vote. And that's why Danville has the question it has. And I'm not sure, I think Mr. Carter indicated there were 2 other cities that elected aldermen from wards. Well, Danville, if it's successful, will be the 3rd city to elect aldermen from wards rather than at-large or a hybrid system. So I wanted to assure everyone that the reason for this question was to continue to elect aldermen from wards.
Thank you. This one is, where's the current mayor? I don't know if that was your question. I don't know where he is tonight, but I think you know where he is on this one. And I think it is. I think all of us on the committee talked to him individually one-on-one before starting this meeting in favor.
You the guys that brought it to the mayor?
Brought it to the mayor.
Yeah. This-
We all talked, I think most of us on the committee talked to the mayor one-on-one.
How large is your committee?
How large is our committee? About 12 people on the steering committee. And we wanted to let the mayor know we were going to do this. And is he in favor of it? I would say no. He thinks the mayor council form of government is stronger. We basically told him we were doing this, whether he was announcing he was running or not. It wasn't about Scott or the position or about the chair. It's about what we needed for the city of
So
Danville.
there were some things happening in Danville that you guys think that you could do better with this city.
It's not us, a city manager, correct.
Yeah.
What are the credentials of an excellent city manager? And I think Steve can handle that one.
What's the salary too?
Typically, you find a city manager, has a master's degree in public administration or business administration, and but I'd have to say that, given the number of cities that have council manager form of government and they have different elected officials that hire different managers at different times, that you see a variety of people in the profession, and anymore, maybe because we're going into a period where there's a little bit of a shortage of managers coming out of school. You're seeing people move from other positions. So I've seen in Illinois a couple of police chiefs who have been appointed city managers. I've seen people from the private sector, who have a strong managerial background, be appointed as managers. But as a general rule, I'd say that most of them have a master's degree in some type of administration and some years of experience in local government. Depending upon, kind of one of the things that a city council would have to do is think, well, what specifically are we looking for in a new city manager? What knowledge, skills, and ability? Are there specific issues that we're facing the next few years? We want to see if we can find someone that has those specific skills. So you can be very specific in terms of what you're looking for. And then the big thing probably is, depending on the years of experience that you're looking for, salary. And another question was, well, what kind of salary? And say, well, I think Urbana is paying $150,000, somewhere in that range, for their new administrator. But Danville's not as large as Urbana, so you would expect the salary to be so high. So I'd say, 100, 120 would be competitive for this size community, and understanding that, you haven't had the position before, so it would be a new position. So for a person looking for a job, it might be a little risky here because you don't know how it's going to work out. With the aldermen that are there and everything. So it's one of those things that, you would get plenty of applications, just a matter of trying to find, well, which is the person that fits our community the best.
So possibility of $300,000.
300,000? Oh,
Include the benefits and all.
no.
How much?
The benefits are not that great.
Part-time mayor.
So you're paying Social Security, you're paying into retirement system, which is under 10%.
About 35% of the total salary, right?
25 to 35% salary, so $120,000. So, this is a decision you make for the long term. You're not in it for what's going to happen in the next 2 years. This is something that you'd have to think. This is going to make Danville a better community over the next 20 or 30 or 50 years.
Really?
And, you go to the community college, you go to local hospital, you go to the school system. If you want expertise, you're going to have to pay a certain amount for that, with the idea that, you're going to be a more successful organization when you have experts in that field. And, the same, works its way down the organization too, because, hiring city manager doesn't do all the work, obviously. You hire police chief, public works director, whatever your departments are, you hire those folks, and you hire the best people that you can for the money you have available, and then you give them the tools to try to do the job. One of the other advantages of council manager form is it does provide a little bit of protection for the employees of the organization, because an alderman or the mayor can't go to the public works director and say, do this, do this, do this, do this. He doesn't have that authority. So all that comes really through the city manager. Now, if you have a citizen complaint, somebody has a pothole in the front yard, call Public Works and tell them, and the Public Works will go out and do it. But, if you're looking at some big issue you want the Public Works director to work on, well, that all has to go through the manager. So from an employee standpoint, I can tell you there's a strong preference on the part of employees to work under a council manager system, just because it's going to be more professional. It gives them a little protection politically, in some cases, as well as just the ability to do their job on a day-to-day basis.
Thank you. Briefly say something about selecting aldermen at large. That simply means that we would select our aldermen across the city. We would not select them by wards, which is the former way prior to 1987, from 26 to 87, that Danville elected their commissioners, not aldermen, but commissioners. Anybody that wanted to run in the city, no matter where you lived, you ran against everybody in the whole city. That changed in 1987, where we created 7 wards we created with 2 aldermen elected from each ward, so they were not elected at large. Our mayor still is elected at large, which means everybody in the city votes for the mayor, not just by wards, which is what this referendum will not change any of that. It will still be 7 wards and 2 aldermen. Does this current city of Danville have a budget? Yes, we do. I think that's state law that you have to have a budget, I believe. Steve, how would that be different under a city manager? Is that the budget process, perhaps, under a city manager? perhaps it would be balanced, but I'll let Steve talk to that.
Again, I don't know how Danville currently does the budget, but so we would start off in Phoenix and Champaign with a session in the fall looking at what our financial forecast is. We did a 5-year financial forecast to try to look at, okay, what do we see as our revenue expenditures over the next 5 years? Then we'd sit down and talk about, well, what's our property tax levy going to be? Because the property tax levy has to be filed late in the fall with the county. And then we would develop some guidelines for departments. So each department, I'm very much a decentralized person. The manager has limited time, and you hire good people and you expect them to be the experts, whether you're the police chief or the fire chief, the public works director. They are the experts in those areas. And so would provide general guidelines and ask them to prepare a budget that they're recommending to the city manager. Would take all of those and identify, well, kind of what are the issues that are present in the budget? Do we have to cut? Do we have enough money to do the things that we need to do? What are people asking for? Kind of what are the big issues that council really needs to decide? Not how much toilet paper the police department buys, but kind of what are major pieces of equipment, major capital improvement projects, any additional staff or any changes in staffing? What are those? Then would meet with the city council and would do that individually or in small groups initially, get their reaction to that, and ultimately then we'd prepare a set of recommendations to the city council, take it to the council and have public hearings and public sessions discussing it for a month, and then the council would tell us what changes to make, would make those changes, and then they'd adopt the budget. So it's a very time-consuming process, but in a way it's not just a budget. I mean, it's a financial plan of services. It tells you what you can afford to do for your citizens for the next year, and that's really how we took a look at it. Is what is it going to change our service level at all? Better, worse? How's it going to change?
What is the mayor's specific objections to the city manager position? And again, I'd invite you to call and ask him that. I know Scott's initial press release when we had our press meeting about a month ago to announce our drive, he indicated it was his position that a city manager, council, form of government, put too much power in the hands of the alderman, and it took the people's voice out of the mayor. People didn't have access to the leaders of their community anymore. That was in his press release. But as he told me, he thinks that the form of government he's operating under is the preferable one in his opinion. But I would be glad you should ask him. How much would the city manager be paid? We talked about that. And how much have they been found to bring in income for the city to offset their pay and their staffs? Steve mentioned having applicants. Freeport was the last community. Freeport and Dixon converted to this in 2016. I don't know if Steve was involved in the hiring of the Freeport, but they had over 40 applicants for their job. They hired an individual with 10 plus years experience. I believe they are paying him $132. It started around $128, $132, somewhere in there. There's an article he writes every 2 weeks in the Freeport Observer, an article about Freeport and how it's doing and how his department is doing. The first year he saved $800,000 expenses, turned revenue by $400,000 for a $1.2 million gain. So basically paid for his salary in the first year. Are there any other public forums planned to educate the public on this referendum? Yes, we told you that we hope to have at least one a month. Our next one is actually Monday, June 18th, 6 p.m. at the Bremer Auditorium, where we'll be joined by Scott Ryden, the city manager of Streeter, Illinois, and Jimmy Landford, the mayor of Streeter, Illinois, so they can tell us how the city manager relationship works with in their city of Streeter. Bob Keeley from the city manager of Lake Forest, Illinois, may also be joining us that night. So June 18th, 6 p.m. at the Bremer Auditorium. Are there any statutory requirements for the individual who would be hired by the city council? Could the council hire anyone it wished?
I'm not really an attorney. See, Jim's the attorney, and even though I tried to act like an attorney sometimes in my job, the city attorney always tried to correct me. But I don't From my recollection of the statute, I don't think there are specific requirements in the statute. It just talks about, city council hiring a qualified manager, and I think council then has some latitude in terms of defining what the actual requirements are. I've kind of gone through, what the typical ones are that you see around Illinois. The other thing I'd mention, the other kind of new thing, because the military is downsizing, so you're starting to see more retired military officers. This current deputy manager in Bloomington, who's one of the 3 finalists for the Bloomington job, retired from the military. He was an Air Force Academy grad, had a career in the military, retired, and then he was a base commander at some point and thought, well, this fits being a city manager, fits his skill set from the military, and very qualified person, I think. So that's another opportunity in terms of hiring people.
I talked about an enabling ordinances just a while ago. The council would have to put the job description, to use a generic term, together and put it in ordinance form, which would then set the qualifications of the people that they are seeking. And when people apply, they look at that ordinance that they have drafted and passed, and then they would see whether that person's qualifications meet what they passed in the enabling ordinance. Again, it puts the power in the alderman. They have the power to establish what the criteria are for the hiring of a manager.
I don't mean to interrupt. Can you be a little more specific about if the ordinance passed, how would you imagine it happening in Danville? Are you going to have a committee of people? Are you going to bring a consultant in like Mr. Carter to help facilitate the process? How would you?
Well, what I would hope would happen wouldn't be this committee. Once our job is only to bring this referendum to the ballot. The mayor and the city council, and I hope they would encourage participation of citizens. So I would hope that they would form a committee to look at what we need for a qualified city manager and have input from the citizens and from the council. The mayor doesn't even vote in this form of government. So the mayor only votes in the case of a tie or a veto. So again, the power, because we elect aldermen from wards, the mayor doesn't vote, the council, there are 14 votes. If it's 8 votes, the mayor doesn't vote, 8 or more. So Mr. Cunningham, my answer would be, I think that the council should, if this passes, meet with various groups of citizens in their wards and across the city to start talking about what qualifications does Danville want to see in a city manager.
I have a question. It may be a trailer for this gentleman here, and maybe you covered this, but if you would for me, less than 50,000. Of course, Danville's less than 50,000. In terms of a city manager, in your experience of what you've read off to us, what a city manager's salary. Tell me what a mayor's salary would be under that, under 50,000.
So that's changed a little bit over the years, I'd say. It used to be, the mayor got the same as the council members, and these are part-time positions, and the council member would make, maybe $3,000 or $4,000 a year. But more recently, even in a council manager government, like in, let's say, Champaign, as an example, a larger city, but during the time that I served there, the mayors probably spent 30, 40 hours a week, even though they were employed also. And they've raised the salary of the mayor in Champaign to $35,000. So typically, again, depending on the size of the city and the amount of the time that you expect a mayor to work probably goes into that, it could be anywhere from under $10,000 up to, again, it depends on the size of the city, but probably maybe as high as 20 or 25,000. That would be unusual. I think in most smaller communities, the mayor's salary is pretty negligible.
What's Freeport's? You mentioned Freeport. How large is Freeport?
I don't
Freeport's
remember.
about 20,000 people, just a little smaller than us. And I think their mayor is in the $20,000 range.
Yeah.
And to follow up on Jim's, we would hope that the council would follow what the school district does. when they're searching for the school superintendent, what DACC has just done with the hiring of Dr. Nacko, and that's to form a community group from across the city to start the interview process and to narrow down the candidates. The final, obviously, selection is the city councils to hire and maintain that city manager. We have a couple more questions. We'll be under our timeline, too. What is the industry advantage to this move? And I don't know if that means bringing more industry in or the advantage for the industries that are here.
Well, I think typically, your businesses in town or anybody looking at town, their managers looking for someone like them, who they think is going to do a good job of looking at the facts and offer them a fair deal. In the community, businesses are looking for good services. They want good transportation. They expect good police and fire services. So having a very professional organization means a lot to an organization. I think, and in terms of going out and attracting businesses, I think, having the policies in place and the programs, and you have incentive programs, have all those laid out by policies so that when you're talking to a business, it's not who you know, it's not who you are, you're a friend of the mayor, so you get a good deal, or you're a friend of the city manager. So everything's laid out by policies that's set by the city council. And so the businesses know that they're getting a fair deal. And I think that's something that they're really interested in.
Yeah, that was my question, and please follow the format.
That's okay. It's all right. We're about done. Go ahead, sir. Sir, go ahead. We're about done.
I also meant that in an intention for business attraction to the city as a dying city that we have with no jobs. Does that also attract jobs to our city for work?
Let's talk about economic development.
If I can add to it, can you talk about Champagne's? When you were city manager, what kind of economic development have you successfully carried through?
Well, in Champaign, we had a regional economic development corporation. Champaign was countywide, and so it was represented by businesses and university in both cities and the county as well. And, the city's economic program focused, in terms of the kind of incentives that we had. Had an enterprise zone. We had a downtown TIF. We actually had 3 different TIFs. We had a TIF in the campus area. Each of those had certain types of programs that we met. One of the programs that was the most successful, some of it is infrastructure oriented. That's a big attraction to business. An example of that would be, look at Campus Town. I never saw people floating in a canoe down Green Street in the middle of Campus Town, but I'm told that it was done, and I've seen pictures of students, engineering students in a concrete canoe floating down Green Street. But so we spent $50 million for flood control in the Campus Town area. To provide a 50-year protection, we came along and did the 2nd Street Reach, which is like a linear park, to finish 100-year flood protection, another $50 million. So we spent $100 million to protect the Campus Town area from flooding. We've had like $250 million worth of investment in campus since we completed that work. So sometimes it's infrastructure, it's providing access, good transportation. One of our more unique incentives was a liquor license. If you come into an old building in our downtown and you spend more than $200,000 and you renovate more than X number of square feet, you'll get a Class A liquor license. And that was part of the rebirth of downtown Champaign, because people who wanted a liquor license came in, a lot of times worked themselves to remodel an old building, brought it up to code, got a liquor license, and started a business. So, you really need to target in terms of, well, what are the needs of your particular community and what are the assets that you have. In terms of attracting overall, people want to live in they want to live in a great community. So the best thing that a city can do is have a wonderful quality of life. And if you do that, then you're going to be attractive, and people are going to want to live here and bring jobs here. So, I mean, that's key. If you look at where people are moving these days, college towns are one of the places where people are moving because the quality of life is so high. So that's a factor, too.
Thank you. And I have one more here. It's an easy answer, I think. Isn't city manager form of government about having the right people in their role able to do the right things at the right time to better serve the city? I would say yes to that one. I want to thank you all for coming tonight. We appreciate it. We appreciate WITY making this available to those who weren't able to join us tonight. Again, we'll have another public forum June 18th, 6 p.m. at the Bremer Conference Center. We'll have a couple more experienced city managers talk about their roles in managing their cities as we all try to learn this. There's a lot of information in the back table if you'd like to take it home. Dr. Hantz's paper, some other papers, the Freeport Observer with their city managers column. There are petitions in the back if you haven't signed it and care to join us in our goal to have this on the ballot in November. Thank you all again. Have a great evening.